The subject of this video is going to be comparing the sharpness, the resolution, the detail between the Epson LS12000 on the left and the JVC RS2100, also known as the NZ7, on the right. So I've loaded up a Microsoft Excel document. This is native 4K 60 Hz 3840 by 2160 resolution. I'm running at 10-bit on both displays. And again, this is just Microsoft Excel, native font size. I'm going to bring the camera up to the screen and let you see what it looks like up the screen. Turn off the room lighting here. Okay. So this is the Epson LS12000. And this is the JVC RS2100. I'm in the way. Let's zoom in on these letters or walk up to these letters. So JVC and Epson. Now keep in mind, the Epson is not a native 4K panel. It's a 1080p 4x pixel shift. So for every single pixel, it's displaying them at 4K, but it's just rotating them in a quad pattern. And so you're getting all 4 pixels, but not at the exact same time. And this is 1-for-1 pixel mapping on the JVC. The difference is not as stark as you might expect for being a 1080p versus a 4K panel. One thing I want you to note is that even though the JVC has a native 4K panel and the Epson's a native 1080p panel, look at the little checker boxes in between the words on this, and as I approach closer, you'll probably see them more. But I think the checker boxes might look a little bit more accurate on the Epson on this, while the text looks a little bit more accurate on the JVC. So you can see the boxes are kind of lighter colored on the Epson on the left-hand side and a little darker colored on the right-hand side. Let me show you what I'm talking about up close. So again, this is the Epson LS12000. And this is the JVC RS2100. I want to show the JVC is in filmmaker mode, and that means that 8K eShift can either be on or off. So this is on. Let me get in close and we'll turn it off. Here's off. Okay, I'm going to back away. Close out the menu. Okay, that is the 8K eShift off. I'll turn it back on. Another thing I want to do is show you what the enhance versus hi-fi does. So to do that, I got to take it out of filmmaker mode. Okay, so here's standard 5. Let me use 2 hands so I can hold this real still. I'm going to go to high-res 1. And then I'm going to go to high-res 2. So we'll step back and I'll do it again. High-res 1, standard. I personally like standard the best. I know some people prefer high-res 1. I don't think very many people prefer high-res 2. On the Epson side of the house, here are your options. This is my custom settings that I prefer for image enhancement. I'm going to switch it to off. I'm going to switch it to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. In person, each one of those gets a little bit sharper digitally. I prefer a kind of middle ground, 3. And then within 3, if I can get into the settings, I modified this slightly just for personal preference. I changed noise from its default of 8 down to 6, and I changed super resolution from its default of 6 up to 8. So this is text, 60 hertz, 1080p, 10-bit color. And then last but not least, this is that Excel document again at native 1080p. Let's go up and look at the fonts on the Epson. And we'll look at the fonts on the JVC. At 1080p, the sharpness on both these is pretty comparable. It may be a little bit of that same thing that the Epson's image enhancement settings that I have maybe bring out a little bit more contrast perhaps, but some of that is user adjustable. Image enhancement, E-shift, 8K E-shift off, and we'll turn it back on. And on. Back to off again. Okay. And I'll grab the Epson remote and we'll just cycle through the image enhancement settings on the Epson. Okay, so this is my preference of 3. There's off. Here's 1. Here's 2. Here's 3. Here's 4. Here's 5. And they kind of get a little bit sharper as you go up the scale from off to 5. So right now it's on preset 5. We're going to switch to off. There's off. Again, the way I like it is preset 3 for media, and there's 3. If you want to compare off and off, there's off on both projectors. Still at 1080p. Pulled up the AVS forum. Kind of show you font on a website. LS12000. RS2100. And here's just a Windows Explorer view. Epson LS12000. JVC RS2100. This is that same quick brown fox test pattern, but it's a native 1080p image. This is on the Epson LS12000. And then over here, the JVC RS2100. You can see they're very comparable. I've just flipped the image on the Epson so that we can compare what's on the actual screen more equally. Of course, there's that overlay in the middle that you'll have to ignore, but you're looking for the actual subjective sharpness between these two projectors side by side. Let me put the JVC back in filmmaker mode because that's the way I prefer to use it. I lose control over the E-shift functionality. It's just what JVC thinks is the best, and I agree with them. I think it's the way I prefer to use this projector. And then the Epson is just in Image Enhancement 3, my custom settings, how I prefer to use the projector there too. So I'm going to hit play. You might call it an artificial sharpening or a digital sharpening, but the tree seems a little bit sharper on the Epson, and that's kind of like the way this plays out for me. The Epson's image enhancement settings seem to be a little sharper in real-world content. If you're looking at test patterns, the JVC probably has the edge. If you're looking at real-world content, in my opinion, the Epson has the edge. I think anyone who would claim that this is some sort of massive difference between a native 4K panel and a 1080p E-shift panel is just not being truthful, because these images are so close that if you walked out of the room and were trying to determine which one is which, I don't know that you could with real world content. So you can kind of see for yourself here. They're so close. I'm going to bring you up to the screen and see which one you prefer. So there's the JVC. And then there's the Epson. Okay, so here is the Epson's hair, and here is the JVC's hair. Okay, here's another test. Look at the whiskers on the sides of their face. You can see, let me see if I can pause it here. You can see that the Epson has brought out more detail in the whiskers on his face. Now, whether you like that or not is probably personal preference, but I think that I like it. It's just more there, it's more present. JVC looks a little bit better on the bear, perhaps. But then on the very next screen with the insect, the Epson looks better again. You can see the feathers on the left-hand side seem to be brought out a little bit more. I want to point this one out, the thatching on this roof. So I'll pause it here. Notice how the Epson doesn't have discoloration on the thatching, but the JVC does. You can minimize that discoloration on the thatching with the JVC, but I can't get rid of it entirely. It's always got that little bit of kind of copper, aged copper looking, like there's some green in there. My pixel panel alignment is like spot on perfect. You know, I've used the quick brown fox to adjust that, so it can't get any better. That's just kind of an artifact of their sharpening algorithm or whatnot, or maybe even just the source image. But you'll notice on the Epson it doesn't do that on the left-hand side, so that's interesting. I paused on this tiger because there's some hair details that we're going to examine. So I'll walk up a little closer to the screen. This is the LS12000. I'm going to walk over to the JVC RS2100. And then I'll let you see them both again. So what did we learn in this sharpness testing? Well, the differences are probably mostly inconsequential if you don't have them side by side. JVC is going to have a little bit sharper image on a native 4K PC desktop because of its one-to-one pixel mapping, so text will be a little bit clearer. In my opinion, subjectively, with the image enhancement settings that I use, the customized settings, the Epson has a little bit of an edge on real-world material. I kind of think the Epson has a little bit of like a Darby player image enhancement sharpening, if you ever used one of those devices. They were a third-party box that you put in your HDMI signal chain. It made a little bit of a sharpness processing on the image, kind of a little bit of a contrasty sharpness, and I think Epson does something along those lines. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's along those lines. And I like it. I subjectively prefer it, actually. So real-world content, I'm going to get a little bit of an edge to the Epson for its sharpness. As to which one you prefer, probably depends on your use case. A little bit of real-world talk here, though. If you're trying to look at native 4K text, native 4K display on a projector image, it's going to have to be a really big image, and you have to be sitting pretty close, because I said about 12 feet away from my screen, and native 4K is too small to read from my seats. So I either have to use scaling, 200% scaling, or I have to knock it down to 1080p. At 1080p, those displays are going to be almost identical on sharpness at a desktop resolution for PC text and all that kind of thing. You kind of saw where the Epson brought out hair detail. I pointed out a few times in the video. I think that's pretty obvious. Seems to boost just kind of like fine lines in real-world content. Kind of puts a little bit more punch to the image, and that sharpness is perhaps artificial, some might argue, but I like it. So again, your mileage might vary. I'm sure two people could see it side by side and have different preferences. For my money, I think the Epson has a little bit preferred image in the sharpness category. If you have any questions, put them down in the comment. I'll try to give you an answer. Thanks for your time.